Why is it not doing anything?
Recording is on.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. It's Sunday, November the 14th, and this is the Eastern Extinctionati meeting. I thought in this one we should go over some geoengineering again because a number of people raised the issue in YouTube and other places. And yeah, I thought that I'd made my position pretty clear, but obviously not. So I thought we should go over it again. We were just talking about silver iodide and how weather modification is going on. That's not the same as climate modification. So it's a complicated subject because geoengineering is multifaceted, and things like planting trees are counting as geoengineering. The land restoration in Siberia is also considered geoengineering. But it's that's not really the bits that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the raw engineering projects, so in other words, the big Manhattan project for getting control of the planet's climate. So that's carbon extraction and stuff is considered geoengineering, but I think carbon extraction is fine if you can figure out a way to power it. So it's carbon extraction is kind of a distraction because it's not viable. There was this good thing that Sam Mitchell put up, which was somebody worked out on the back of an envelope, and I think it's right. They said if you got every power station that was emitting CO2 now and just flipped the sign on it, so it was instead of emitting CO2, it started absorbing CO2. It would take 30 years to get back to 350 parts per million. So we're about 420 now. And the really bad stuff starts now. They say 450, but yeah, it's really now. And so, it's the idea that we could run our entire industrial system in reverse for 30 years just shows you how screwed we are. So it's a diversion and keeps hopium up. So yeah, it's wrong to talk about carbon capture because there's no way of powering it, and all the projects that they do, like the ones in Sweden, Switzerland. Sweden is BECCS, so it only works when you got on a very small scale. When you got lots of trees, it's basically a forestry technique. So BECCS is the one that they had, all the RPC 6 and stuff relied on BECCS in the IPCC report. So it's another way of saying we're screwed. Then, the direct air capture ones, the big fans, they need to be powered, and the existing ones, they're powered by power stations that are, just use fossil fuel power. And then the CO2 that they get, they say, oh, we'll put it in soda and things like that. Well, if you put it in soda, it goes straight back into the atmosphere as soon as somebody opens the bottle. And if you, and the biggest thing that they've been using it for is enhanced oil recovery. So the CO2 is being used for fracking. So in other words, to get more oil out. So you're just assisting the oil industry. And it's just, so it's all this kind of denial. But the stuff that I'm talking about where it gets really dangerous are these things where people want to get control of the climate. And that's particularly David Keith's one. David Keith's one is the worst because it'll probably work. See, people think, oh, it'll go wrong and stuff. No, it won't go wrong. It's basically doing what Mount Pinatubo did. So they're just mimicking a volcano. So it's definitely going to work. But the problem is psychological. And the very first problem, the major reason why we shouldn't be doing this is, well, it's the wrong mindset. So what the guy in Slovenia was saying is, it'll give us time. They always say, we need time, like an alcoholic. I need time to sober up. You can't do this quickly. So no, the problem is that attitude. What the time for psychological adjustment is to get out of the mode of we're in control. So the whole of the Industrial Revolution came from this idea that we're in control, we can fix, we can engineer, we can scheme, we can manipulate, we can get the upper hand. It says it's that mindset that needs to go. So you can't say, well, we need to do, just the expression of saying, well, maybe we need to do geoengineering is an expression of the very mindset you should be working on getting rid of. So to say like, I will let go, I'll just let go tomorrow. It's like, no, you're not letting go now while the pressure's really on. When solar radiation management happens, the pressure will be completely off. And so then, you'll be in the position of moral hazard where everybody will go, well, we have these pills to save my liver, so I don't have to stop drinking. And that's, it's just more alcoholic talk. So it doesn't really help to talk to people much about this because you're talking to an unrepentant alcoholic. And they will not let go. They will not accept, no, we are subject to nature. We're subject to kairos and the weather and the climate. And that's the way you want it to be. There are some things you do not want to have control over. And that's definitely one of them. You need to be subordinated to something. And if you're not subordinated to anything, there's no limits. You say, well, then if you're technotopian, then you say, well, there are no limits. That's fantastic. We're Superman now. We're Homo Deus. We have control of everything. We don't, because we don't have control of ourselves. So at the very, even if there was a God in the sky, that God would still need control of herself, right? So it's all about limits. And that is a limit too far. We've already gone too far. But that one opens a can of worms because it gives us time. And the moral hazard is the biggest worry. But yeah, it's the economist's first choice, and we're going to do it. It's plan A. I was just saying to Derek Jensen is that secretly their plan all along has been plan A. If you look in the Economist after the last IPCC report AR6, it said that it just had a whole op-ed piece, pages of it, just lamenting the fact that the whole of the IPCC report was just geoengineering. It was basically a manifesto for geoengineering. And what they were pissed off about was that it didn't appear in the summary for policymakers. The word geoengineering wasn't mentioned in the summary for policymakers. And The Economist, which is hugely influential journal, just was pissed off that wasn't put in the summary. In other words, they didn't just go full guns for geoengineering. That's what they were pissed off about. So The Economists won it, and The Economists want it. And as soon as we get it, as soon as we get solar radiation management, they will go full bore on all the hydrocarbons. There's a lot of hydrocarbons. They've all been working on the clathrates. Every time they find new clathrates, like off India, they found the clathrates in 2 meters off India. And and lots of them. And you would have thought they would have been terrified. Said, you know how dangerous this is for, the warming seas. And instead they went, oh, a new fuel source, an unlimited fuel source. It's like, no, you're looking at your death. And these guys just think of it as a fuel source. So there's tons and tons of hydrocarbons to burn. This society only runs on hydrocarbons. There's no ammonia or sodium, or there is no replacement for this highly dense fossil fuel. It's a fossil fuel industry. Our whole culture is a fossil fuel industry, and our food and everything. But most of all, the power base. It's all based on the petrodollar and the power structures that are based on energy. Ever since Roman times, the power base was corn coming from Egypt. Why? Because that was their energy source. They ran on slaves, and you eat slaves' grain. So that's what That's what they were doing. So it's whatever you feed slaves and run the machines on, that's your power source. So you're not talking about, you know, transitioning to a clean form of energy. You're talking about taking away people's power. These are the most powerful people in the world with hydrogen bombs. You're not going to take them away by sitting in the road. It's pathetic. So anyway, geoengineering doesn't work from so many angles, but the basic thing is to get out of the mindset of controlling everything. That's what we need to do first. So it's a battle against ourselves. It's not a battle against climate change. Everybody says, you know, we must solve climate change. No, we must solve human psychology. That's what needs to change. And that's the one thing they're not addressing. And it only gets worse with geoengineering. But anyway, then somebody also asked, well, you know, then they're always alcoholic talk. I'm loath to address it, but okay, let's talk technical and alcoholic talk. We'll give a bit of slack to the alcoholics. So he's saying, well, what about marine cloud brightening? Well, that's the other one. So it's solar radiation management, marine cloud brightening. Those are the ones they're going to do. The microspherules in the Arctic and stuff is completely misbegotten. It's it's not science. It's bullshit. So that's not going to happen. But those two will. And so the solar radiation management, from a technical point of view, is a crazy idea. So, I mean, marine cloud brightening is crazy, and the reason is the most potent greenhouse gas is water vapor. Everybody forgets because they talk about carbon, but they forget it's water vapor, and it's the clouds that are making the global warming. It's cloudy today over here and raining, and so it's warm. So it's like you say, well, which comes first, the clouds or the warmth? It's like they're both reinforcing each other. So they know this very well, and they say, oh, well, they'll do this marine cloud brightening, you know, in very specific locations that they've modeled and stuff like that, and saying, well, to me, it just seems crazy because you increase the albedo of marine clouds. So you have this big tower, you have a big ship, this big hose up in the air, so you can, you know, basically spray a fire hose up at as high altitude as you can get. Well, you got to put all that water up there. That column of water that you're going to rise there has to be done with something. And I'm telling you, all the experiments they've done so far, they've done it on a ship. So it's done with marine diesel, which is highly polluting. So to raise that column, you have to subtract the CO2 effect of the diesel that you're using to raise the column. But just the idea, it's just a horrific idea it's like, you know, it's just such an abuse of your mother. The sea is just everybody's dumping ground. It's like a blue thing that's completely irrelevant. No, the sea is the basis of our existence. Right? If you fuck with the sea, land is gone. Land is the afterthought. Everybody thinks, oh, we'll carry on fine on land. Oh, who cares about the birds and this fish? I mean, they're just fucking things you see when you go down to the seaside. No, the oxygen we breathe comes from the sea. The CO2 is being absorbed by the sea. If the sea goes, we're fucked. The life on Earth is fucked. So it's the sea comes first, not last. But the idea that you can vacuum up, you know, a huge vacuum running around parts of the equator, putting up marine clouds, it's like it's just a big vacuum cleaner for marine life. And so somebody said to me, yeah, well, I'm sure they thought about filtering. No, they haven't thought about filtering. There's no way you can fucking filter marine life out of your fucking contraption. Are you fucking nuts? These people are nuts. It's like, oh, the marine life, that's an afterthought. Okay, it's like putting a knife through your grandmother and saying, yeah, well, this will be worthwhile since we don't have a Thanksgiving turkey. These people are mad, madder than Joe Mad McMad. And they have the forum, and they're all the sane ones. They talk in a low voice and all very rational. And it's like, how can you be rational when you're talking about putting a vacuum cleaner in the sea? You know how much damage a fucking ship does just going through the sea? It's incredible. And then these people want to actually scoop up the upper layer of the ocean and spray it out in an aerosol. It's like, oh my God. I can't be rational about it because all I want to do is pick up a gun and shoot people between the eyes. They're just so damn stupid. They just need to be put down like dogs. You do not deserve to live if you don't. If you cannot see this, you're too stupid to live. That's all I can say. You're not a viable creature. So yeah, that's my take on geoengineering. But I'll let somebody else speak.
So one of the things that I've often wondered by analogy is kind of that, you know, the mycelium networks and things like that on land and topsoil, and tilling the land just destroys the soil, the biome inside the soil. And I was just wondering, you know, how much of that kind of life network of plankton and things like that are in the ocean water, and how, you know, just ripping through that with a vacuum would just destabilize the diatoms and the plankton and whatever is you know, at the bottom of the food chain that everything lives off of.
Yeah, so no, it's no one knows. This is the problem, is they're all experimenting with you know, stuff that you need to experiment with for a long time to understand, right? So just talking experimenting, most engineering is done by trial and error. So now people like David Keith say, okay, we can just tickle the tail of the dragon, we can do all this slowly, but it doesn't work like that. It's a dynamically unstable system. So you're just like, you know, when they were tickling the tail of the dragon with the nuclear, you know, with the Manhattan Project, and they were getting bricks of uranium-235 and putting them together to see when they went critical. Then, yeah, they went critical. The guys dropped the fucking brick and killed himself. It was a big blue flash, and he basically, because they overstepped the mark. So if that was the Earth, we would have cost us the Earth. They would have stepped over a tipping point. You can't experiment and do geoengineering with the Earth, right? It's not negotiable because we only have one of them. So you're making an all-in bet for not just us, but everything on this planet, all animals on this planet. And it's excruciatingly sensitive. That's the one thing we will not learn, is we think of these things as robust. But just the aerating the water completely changes the biome of the water. So for example, I stopped at this place, this one port, and there was a gap on the quay, so I went astern there. And I didn't know why there was a gap, but I found out quickly, because there was a sewage outlet. There was a sewage outlet right into the sea. So here's the thing. It wasn't smelly, and it wasn't too bad. And the reason is they pumped it with air. So they had hugely aerated it. So I could feel while I was there that it's in the air. They're basically pumping sewage because it aerosols, it's bubbles, right? So there was no smell. The hugely rich, you know, area for marine and algal growth because it's been aerated, but it's also coming into the air. But you see, you can't, if you change the oxygen balance of these things, you're profoundly changing all these cycles. So the carbons, there's so many cycles that involve the ocean: the carbon cycle, the water cycle, you know, the part of the reason why the pH balance is maintained in the sea is because of weathering. So you get weathering on rocks, and then, you know, basically bases come down the rivers into the sea and stuff like that. It's all being maintained on a very narrow balance. So by the time you realize you made a big cock up, you might be 20 years into this project, and then you have no option for reversal. So all these guys are thinking of it in a one-way thing. They're thinking of it in terms of one way, no reversal. They don't have a plan, an insurance plan at all. So they're saying, this is insurance for climate change. And what's the insurance for your fix? And nobody will talk about an insurance thing because there is none. They're going all in. They're gamblers. And then they don't want to talk about the insurance because it exposes them as reckless gamblers and not the, you know, sage and level-headed scientists they're trying to pretend they are. So Yeah, the ecosystem is incredibly finely balanced. I mean, they're finding out new things all the time. You thought like, oh, well, you know, nobody thought in the 70s when we were talking about Save the Whale, we thought, oh, no, whales are cute and they make a nice logo. Now we found out, well, actually, the iron from whale poop is an important part of the nitrogen cycle is basically important for cyanobacteria, and that's our oxygen. So our oxygen comes from fucking whale poop. Whoever saw that coming? But oxygen, you know, nobody ever mentioned that one.
Yeah,
But anyway, it's the same lesson over and over. It's a very sensitive system that they think is robust, and they're making a huge mistake.
Yeah, speaking of sensitive system and iron and oxygen, there was a tipping point earlier. The reason we have oxygen in the atmosphere is because you had all this anaerobic bacteria that was pooping out oxygen in the ocean before, and it rusted all of the iron out from the ocean into, you know, this layer on the seafloor, which is why we can mine iron ore. That's a life-driven process where there was a tipping point that it killed all those bacteria because there was too much oxygen, and it's such a fragile system that we can reach another tipping point at any time.
But it's like a big fermentation vat in that respect. So those aerobic bacteria, it was impossible to even start a fire on Earth before those aerobic bacteria. But they killed themselves off with the oxygen. It poisoned them and then created an aerobe, which is us. So it made a whole new branch of life on the tree of life, but everything was anaerobic before then. But you can see it looks pretty much like a fermentation vat. So it will go to extremes and come back again. So, you know, like a fermentation vat, that's exactly what happens. The yeast converts the sugars to alcohol, which is what alcohol is. And then the alcohol eventually poisons them and it stabilizes in some kind of wine or whiskey or some kind of beverage. But, you know, it's the same thing happened on a planetary scale. So the Earth has done that. But those are incredibly dramatic times and turnarounds with millions, even billions of years to unfold the consequences. So it's very, very slow. But you know, Harari annoys me, Yuval Harari, because he makes all these sweeping statements. And one of them that really annoyed me was he said, you know, that never in the history of planet Earth has a single species changed the entire planet, but we are the first to actually, you know, fundamentally change the planet. And it's like, that's horseshit. The Great Oxidation Event was one example. Another example was about 60,000 years ago. Was the greater is not sure 60 million years ago. It was the Azola event. So the Azola event, Azola is like a freshwater plant. It's a fern really, but it floats. And yeah, the Azola took over the whole Earth, sucked all the CO2 out and caused an ice age. So basically, Azola transformed the Earth much more than we ever will. So people say, immediately when you tell people that, then they say, hey, well, can't we plant Azola everywhere? I say, no, it's a freshwater plant. There's not enough freshwater.
Can I say something there, Hugh? Because I would like to go back to what you said at the start in reply to the comment that was put in under the meeting there about geoengineering. And what you said very rightly, and I agree with you, is it's a problem of mindset. And we're dealing with an enormous majority of people who are in this addiction to fossil fuels and to our lifestyle. And you're absolutely right to say that we're talking about how the alcohol is damaging the liver to an alcoholic who says, well, I can have a liver transplant, or you're talking about all sorts of everything we're talking about really is like talking to an addict, in fact, aren't we? We just the messages we're trying to get across there, even when you and Ryan are talking about this and that, and yeah, we talk about the body, our mother's body, the planet, And we're saying, well, this is doing this to the body, and we're addressing, I don't know who is listening to our meetings, I don't know who are the people who come in, but I cannot understand that somebody in the comments could put something like that without realizing that what they're saying is just, oh, well, I won't drink vodka, I'll drink beer because it won't be as bad. And then I'll take a few tablets so it will go, and I can't get across to people with this now. You always find yourself against the wall. And we have Petra is here, I think, and Petra is a psychologist. And I wonder if you wouldn't come in to talk to us about this mindset too at one stage of the people we talk to, people we address, because we are against a wall. We know what we're talking about. Some of us know what we're talking about, but we've got this this wall. What do you think?
So this happens at dinner time for me. So I'm actually chopping, but I'm trying to hold the thread. I'm grating cheese and chopping tomato, but that's probably a good place to speak. I think a combination of denial and attachment to a particular kind of lifestyle means most people aren't going to go there. Most people aren't heroes or saints, and most people don't want to lose their comforts. And it doesn't seem to matter because we're not a species evolved for the apocalypse. We're a species evolved for running right now from a fire or a predator. And I think it's too abstract for most people to grasp, and it requires so much lifestyle change. Actually, I remember Hugh saying recently, maybe in the discussion with Derek, there's all these studies that have come out. I've only read the mainstream media versions of them, but that are saying people think they're doing enough. I mean, it's just laughable, but that's where it's at. So I think that it's a combination of our species predilections or biases and our resistance to change. And I think it's like addiction, but it's also subtler than addiction. I think it's kind of the way humans are wired. It's not that we can't shift it, but I think it's incredibly difficult to do so. Like it's almost as if people will change when it's too late. That's my sense, which is a bit depressing, but I'm sure that seems utopian in this group. I'm positively upbeat here. So yeah, I don't know.
I think so too. So that's the book I'm writing is like about the layered brain and why it dooms us to extinction, because it's kind of a magic combination of psychology that dooms us. So if any one piece was missing, it would probably be our salvation. But everything is designed around humans, and I think psychology and society to be dynamically stable. So it's designed for stasis, not for movement. It's for very good reason. It's designed to be homeostatic, and so it's very difficult to move, especially for something abstract. And the upshot of it is that anybody that hopes for a voluntary mass change in body is only going to get it when it's too late. It's only going to get it when people are feeling the pain. And by the time, comfortable Westerners are feeling the pain, it's far too late by that stage. It's already too late, actually. So if you're feeling a bit too upbeat and a bit too positive, then you should talk to Torsten, because he understands the ice pretty well. And no matter what we do, this narrative of control and this idea that we can actually do something is very, very false one. It's basically, we would have had to start in the 70s, but we're going to lose the ice. Nobody talks about it. But the guys who cryosphere specialists will tell you that we're going to lose the Arctic no matter what we did. If we stopped everything, if we did carbon capture at a furious pace, if we kind of redeemed ourselves in every way possible, we're going to lose the Arctic and we'll lose the Greenland ice sheet. So those are gone, and with those we're kind of gone too. so a lot of what people are talking about is just BS, because they know pretty well that it's too late to save the ice.
What's that that principle where, you know, to relieve congestion, you try to expand the lanes in the highway, but that always makes the problem worse because people just buy more cars?
Yeah, it's called moral hazard, or the escalation of commitment. It's called yeah, it's called no, I can't remember. Escalation, isn't it?
I don't know.
Yeah,
It
it's
seems like that's exactly what we're aiming at, is getting more lanes on the highway of fossil fuel consumption.
yeah, and it's pretty much like yeah, what is that? Well, it's like a hedonic treadmill. So it's the same as with an addiction, is that people get habituated to the levels of the substance they're abusing, and then they have to up the dosage to get the same effect.
Yeah, it seems it's Jevons paradox. Jevons paradox.
Jevons paradox is the irony. Yeah, it is Jevons paradox. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing about adding lanes on the highway is not usually Jevons paradox, but the using, you know, that's the thing about when people say about solar panels and stuff getting cheaper, and alternative energy and green energy getting cheaper, is they're saying, you know, it's the Jevons paradox, because they assume it will replace the existing thing, and it doesn't occur to them that no, it'll just be augmented. Well, people will use solar and, you know, fossil fuel things, and so you say, well, surely, you know, solar gets so cheap that it eventually makes it uneconomic to run a fossil fuel thing. Saying no. The markets are linked. So, you know, a reduction in the price of solar panels, if it reduces demand in the oil market, it will reduce the oil price. So, you know, you will go pari passu, and the net thing you find out is the EROEI. So it's basically, it's just how, you know, and it costs about $11 to get a barrel of oil, and you're never gonna get alternative energy for 11 bucks with you know, 100 megajoules in a barrel or whatever it is. That is an extraordinary amount of energy in a barrel. And for an extraction cost of 11 bucks, you're never going to beat it, because you're mining cobalt and shit. You know, you're just not going to do it.
And
in other words, imagine your what's the name, Leaf. Imagine your car, your what's the name, Leaf or whatever. It had to mine itself. If it had to mine all its components and all the lithium that goes into it, it's like, come on, the machine wouldn't be able to replicate itself.
Yeah, and since solar panels are fossil fuel products, if the price of oil goes up, so will the price of solar panels.
What they're thinking is that you can rob Peter to pay Paul. They're saying, no, you artificially, then if you're a socialist and like government control, then you say, well, you can have a carbon tax, so we can make it so expensive to get all these fossil fuel products that it switches people's behavior. And I think this is nutty, because they're thinking in terms of a frame, and they're not thinking it all the way through. So in other words, they don't answer the question like, what happens to the tax revenue that gets raised? So I'll tell you what happens to the tax revenue that gets raised in most countries. It goes into the treasury, and then they spend it. And where do they spend it? Well, they're not going to spend it into the clean green economy. They're going to spend it into the fossil fuel economy. They're going to spend it on consumption, because they're going to try to buy off the electorate. They're going to do social programs. They'll do a little bit for infrastructure, and they'll do a lot for the military. So the military can't be greened, and that's a third of all the revenue that the US massive elephant collects goes to the military. Military is not going to put solar panels on their tanks, okay? You're not going to get fighter jets, running on ammonia or something nice. This just doesn't happen. So you're going to get there with a carbon tax because they will spend that revenue. I mean, you could just as well say, why don't you just suck money out of the economy, just withdraw dollars, and then if you did that, you would slow the economy down. Well, you get a 1% reduction in CO2 for every % reduction in GDP. So, cut the money in circulation by half, you get a reduction in CO2 that would be commensurate with, with the IPCC targets. But you see, it's all this denial. It's all these various forms of denial. But they play a carbon tax is just a shell game. So saying, well, we just take money away from here, but it's like, and then they never say what happens and then. So once you go a few circles around these things, then you realize this doesn't work. There's no way this system works. And so it's a question of people figuring that out for themselves. But it's like most people don't have a clue how it works currently. So let alone the fact that it can't be reformed is like, PhD level for most people. It's like teaching physics to a dog. And if that's what's required to get the attitude, it's like, no, we're never going to teach physics to a dog. So it has to be involuntary. You have to get a few people that get it, and then basically would start a program of ecotage. That would do it. So yeah, that's that. Oh, so anyway, does anybody want to say any more on that? Because I should address that, because one of the people was asking pretty much about that. One of the questions we had.
Well,
I have
first
a question.
Go
I
ahead.
have a question. Oh. It's a little off this track. I mean, it's an adjunct. So if you would like to finish on this point, perhaps I can ask it afterwards. It's a separate train of thought. Okay to go now? Okay, so
no, go for it. Go for it.
I
yeah.
think teaching physics. I think I'd be like the dog learning physics. So this is more a discourse culture question. I'm interested in how climate change denial is getting annexed to there of what's happening with lockdowns and mandates and QR codes and so on. Within that, certainly in Australia, but elsewhere, I'm just noticing this climate change denialism that is centered on defining, it's a conspiracy theory, defining, and I use that carefully, defining climate change as something constructed by elites in 1930, blah, blah. But I'm interested that there's an understanding and critique at the lay level and among intellectuals about the rising totalitarianism. But then there's just this climate change denial that comes from left field. And I can go with Greta's a kind of puppet or pieces of that. And I even noticed threads of it in Alison McDowell. Now, I got that she was trying to say that green tech was the way in which this totalitarianism would be funneled into the system under the guise of something we all needed, this 11th hour green tech. But I just wonder, what are your thoughts on that, Hugh? Do you have any thoughts on that? How these two are put together now?
Yeah, so the climate denial has ended. It's all the force has gone out of it. It was invented by the oil industry on the back of the tactics used by the tobacco industry. But yeah, there's a rich fascist friend that I've got who is a massive climate denier. And I watched him over the years. He tries to influence people with, blogging and sending out emails and stuff like that. So he tries to be an influencer, and he changed. He went from climate denier to all the way now to say the thing now is they all admit, the mainstream denialists admit that there is climate change. They moved on now to say that it might not be anthropogenic. So it's a natural cycle. But here's the thing about, you see, there are two things going on. One of them is all of this stuff comes from the conservative right wing. So what the left wing has done, particularly the ESG industry and the kind of militant left-wing billionaire set, so the green tech billionaires and stuff like that, who all vested, like Elon Musk, in government subsidies. Elon Musk made all his money out of your tax money. So he made all his money out of subsidies, and then the subsidies fueled his Ponzi scheme on the stock market. So it's basically, there's a lot riding on this, and these guys are far more vested. So this is the thing that I see over and over again. The right wing has the instinct. So when they say things like this rich billionaire guy, fascist guy, he'd say for years he's been saying, you know, that this whole green thing is just a hoax. It's just about money. It's just about subsidies and stuff. And he's right. He's absolutely right. It is all bright green lies. But the bits that those guys don't get is the fact that that doesn't mean that climate change is real. So they're absolutely right. We live in capitalism, and all these capitalists are trying to cash in on disaster. It doesn't mean that they think that means the disaster is manufactured. No, the disaster is not manufactured. It's just what they're doing about it is going to cost us. So the left is wrong to put all these right-wing guys down, because their heart is in the right place. So they can smell a rat. They know exactly what these people are doing, and they're right. They're all heinous criminals. They're not good guys. There's nobody on the bright green lies side that's a good guy. None of these green tech guys are good guys. And so they've got that right. Then so to defend their worldview, and because they're conservatives by definition, they don't want to change. They like their privilege. They like where things are at, and so they vested in the system just like the left wing is. But their way of defending their belief system is then to say there's nothing you can do about climate change, and it's natural, and there's nothing to worry about. We'll survive it. So these things are very strange for me, because they hark right back to my upbringing in apartheid in South Africa. So we were facing genocide. So if you consider climate genocide and ecological genocide for political genocide, which is what we're heading for, it's all exactly the same dynamic. There all these guys who, like the left wing, they say, oh, we can all reform the system, we can change, we can do all of this stuff. All of this, it's just tokenism. And saying, we can do this bit of tokenism and that'll stop the genocide, the coming genocide. The black people will forgive all the white people and then we can all coexist. And they're like, that's never going to happen. and then the right wing side was saying, no, it'll never happen. We'll always have control. Now this whole idea that we'll wind up in genocide it'll never happen in my lifetime. There was exactly the same deal, the same kind of bargaining tactics. And so, you shouldn't give any literal substance to what they're saying. You should only give substance to their psychology, because it's exactly the same dynamic. You can see the same psychology in operation, and all the arguments, all the technical arguments, all the current discussion about climate change, where the level is at, is all the cans and can'ts and do's and engineering and technical things and economic things. All of those are irrelevant, because they're just people using those to bolster their psychology. So the psychology is always the fundamental thing underneath. Everything else is an excuse. So the IPCC, the COP26 we've just seen, is just a blah, blah, because they're just justifying their psychology. They're not really, economists talking, formulas and models and stuff like that. It's all just horseshit that they concocted to support their psychology. There's no substance in the actual technical arguments they're making. The arguments are just psychology. So you always come back to the psychology, and the psychology is the psychology of addiction.
I think it's a little bit deeper than psychology, though. So it seems like most of the what Uncle Ted wrote about with the the system's neatest trick, is that it seems like whenever your heart is in the right place, let's say the liberal heart is about, let's try to, take care of these things, and what you see, like, oh, let's do a protest and these kinds of things, all of those actions, like climate action, these kinds of things, all support the technical industrial system, right? They're all bolstering it. That every revolution is actually propping up the system. It's not tearing it down. And it uses the psychology of the people to get more and more control. Like, part of it is a lot of these problems are global, and nuclear proliferation, AI, climate change, and the way to solve it is to dismantle the technical system and decentralize everything. But the solutions that are proposed are all we need to centralize all control globally, right? Instead of dismantle everything, we need to gain control and monitor everything, right? So it's still how Bill Gates pushes propaganda through the Kurzgesagt channel on YouTube and all these things. Like, it's switching people's minds to let's rebel against the system by propping it up behind the scenes. Like, there's very few channels that are like the easiest channels of rebelling are almost always in support of the system, which is why it's never going to be removed, because people aren't wise enough to question those channels.
Yeah, it's called controlled opposition, and the basis of it was laid out after the war, after the Second World War. So they are master manipulators. So these guys are it's a well-known psyop to co-opt the people to work against their own interests. That's why Fawlty was saying that since Proudhon and these guys, they've said that the bourgeois, and Lenin, all these guys said the bourgeois is far worse than the actual counter-revolutionaries. It's basically the oligarchs, the plutocrats, and cacotocracy is they are easier to win over or beat than the lukewarm middle class, because the lukewarm middle class, they are the functionaries that keep the system going. So a campaign of ecotage is not really okay. There are 2 points of a campaign of ecotage, and that's if a mass campaign. It's not so much to a control thing. There are a number of things to do. So yeah, I must address this because this was one of the questions that somebody asked. It's like, if we know that the system is destined to collapse, why not just sit back and watch it? I'm saying, oh, that's a terrible thing to do. That's a twisted form of the control narrative. So that's a demonic form of the same sickness. So there are a number of reasons why you don't want to sit back and just watch it. So one of them is it'll eat your soul. It's like being in Auschwitz and saying, like, oh, I know that the Allies are in the war and this is soon going to end, so we might as well just carry on. It's like, no. That's so wrong. We don't know that the Allies are going to win. We don't know that we don't go extinct. We don't know that maybe down the road we find out that if we had just put a tiny bit of effort in, just a butterfly's wing effect would have solved, would have changed the whole outcome. So you can't be so certain of the outcome that you can sit back and just trust things will collapse. The second thing is the collapse is very likely to be final and definitive. And so my anticipation is that it runs into geoengineering. Geoengineering lasts decades. Geoengineering will do for 30 years. At the end of that 30 years, our fate is sealed. So you want to start people thinking in terms of defecting from the system. Now, you need to resist, because you'll get depressed. Just watching the system go down for 30 years will be the end of you. So for your own therapy and sanity and psychological development, you need to resist. Otherwise, you're complicit. So and if you so for example, so I'd say in terms of psychology, for the sake of your primate brain, you cannot sit by and watch evil and destruction and say, yeah, but I know how this ends. It's like, that's the most demonic form of diversion that your alien cortex, unreformed and unenlightened, can come up with. That's the most devious defense of the lot. It's the epitome of evil. So it's kind of such a refined form of evil that it's diabolical. But so the major thing, for the reason why it's worth having these conversations, why it's worth having an underground society, is it's for most people. If you can get this kind of mindset of every, like the Extinctionati, to a stage where it becomes, a cult or a force, it's a rite of initiation to get people to do something physical against the system. So it doesn't have to be major, but if you just start, if you break the seal, if you do some tiny act against the system, it's the first act of defection from the system. And once you do that, it snowballs. So it's, most people sit around and talk like we're doing now, but it's not. Don't assume that it never gets anywhere. It goes drop by drop by drop by drop. Eventually, what happens, usually after about 2 years, people will say, like, there's too much talk and stuff. It's like, they have an epiphany that, no, we really must do something. And you say, well, in saying it over and over again is go and wreck something. So that, when they eventually go like, oh, you mean really go and do something like we've just been talking about all the time? Yeah, you can actually go and do that. And they go, wow, I thought we just talked about that. No, you can actually go do it. And then they go and do it. That can take off like a brush fire, right? So once people do it, you see, Faulty knows this, right? Unfortunately, Faulty is off on his own. He's got the baggage of this years and years of left-wing thought on how to do activism. And this is not a fight. This is not activism. This is not civil rights or the suffragettes or getting the vote or getting social change. This is about going headlong against power. So this is entrenched power, and fossil fuel is part of the power system. So they're missing one giant piece, and that's the financial system. So the financial system props up the energy system, and the two of them make the scientific industrial system. So it's a vast nexus of it's Moloch. It's like a force of nature, and so these left-wing people are fundamentally underestimating what we're up against. But as time goes on, you drop by drop by drop, this kind of talk gets in. And then at some stage, it's possible that people start, it suddenly takes off and you get a mass campaign of disobedience. So I keep on putting things out there that are really designed, the primary thing, all my ideas that nobody takes up. Well, some people have, they've tried some of them. But a lot of these ideas, they're bedeviled by the fact that you have to follow them. If you don't know what you're doing, in other words, if you don't know the thinking behind them, then you have to follow them to the letter. You have to follow them blindly. But unfortunately, people think they know more than they do. And so they don't follow them. They don't understand them, but they don't, it's a Dunning-Kruger effect. They don't understand that they don't understand them. So you see things like Gail going off and doing a death stroke. And she thinks she has the leeway. She doesn't understand the finance system. She doesn't understand human psychology very well. And then she goes off and does it, and then she immediately gets slapped with a serious lawsuit about committing fraud, debt fraud. And you say, like, well, yeah, because you didn't know what the hell you were doing and you didn't listen. So but anyway, the whole point of these things that I do, like switching, the lights off, on and off and stuff, is not the effect, not trying to bring down the system. It's notionally, the main thing is to get people to do something that signifies their initiation into defection from the system. So in other words, their first act of overt resistance, and that sets them up for life, right? The only way people can be brought back from that is if the authorities get hold of them and turn them. So, but if they never get caught, they will just be the cancers. That they will, their enthusiasm, it's a drug. You see, the same drug that's keeping people complacent and keeping peers. So the way to get over learned helplessness, they've cultivated learned helplessness in us. A lot of they love to have all these doom and gloom headlines and stuff because they're keeping the masses pacified. It makes them too enervated to do anything. It's like scurvy in the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy didn't want to cure scurvy because it kept people listless and non-rebellious. So the same thing is they want people to be miserable. They want people to be dismayed by the cop because they want to divert them into, pointless action like non-violent action. It's just basically bleeds their passion off. So the thing is that if they just turn just once and start doing something against that becomes something that gives them energy, meaning to life. Suddenly they become alive. So the key to getting, you see, the animals that they did those experiments on, basically you give a dog, say, so many shocks through its feet with no way of escape. Eventually, when you do give it a way of escape, it still doesn't escape. It just goes into this whiny, helpless mode. And what they didn't carry those experiments on, but you can get somebody out of the state of learned helplessness. It's just a process of very, very slow habituation. So you just, to get a dog out of learned helplessness, you just have to, lower the intensity of the shocks, and give it some way where it can get control of its situation. Just a tiny thing. Just a small morsel of effectively what it does is it gives dopamine, right? So you just give a tiny bit of, you just give the person a bit of dopamine, and then they'll get addicted to it. So that if you do an act, a physical act of ecotage against the system, it gives you a bit of dopamine, and that dopamine then you escalate it. You get on a hedonic treadmill, and eventually you'll carry on until you get caught. Now, if you never get caught, that kind of thing can spread. So it can spread as long as people are disaffected with the system, and it's kind of, people are guaranteed to be disaffected by the system because the system is collapsing. So it's like what happened in South Africa, is you can be guaranteed that things are not going to get better. Things are going to get worse and worse. The infrastructure is going to crumble. The financial system is going to get worse. There's going to be more problems in terms of the four horsemen. Everything goes against the system, and the system is fragile. But if, you see, a lot of people in their learned helplessness, they say, well, this is hopeless, nobody's going to turn and stuff. There are a number of things that they're thinking wrong. The first thing they're thinking wrong is they think this system is hugely robust and a huge force. That's the very first thing that any rebel needs to question, because you can almost take it as read that the system is not nearly as robust as you think. If you were in the shoes of one of these totalitarians, like Xi or something, is every night, I'm telling you, he goes to bed wishing he was in a different situation, thinking like, I'm so weak, here am I putting up this big bluff, and how long are people going to be fooled by it? We stretch so thin, everything's about to fall apart tomorrow. And then he goes in front of a big parade, military parade, and everybody goes, oh, China's rising, saying like, no, China's falling apart behind you, before your very eyes, you can't see it. So you mustn't assume that these guys you mustn't fall for their bluff. All of these systems are tremendously fragile. What holds them together is the fact that everybody supports them because they believe in the lie. So they get people involved in the lie, and they get them to carry on and perpetuate the lie. It's like I was saying, when you go for a job interview, they check that you will lie, and then they get you into the lie. Then they get you into the corporation, and then you get on the phone with customers and partners, and you lie. Everybody's lying. And so they liars, they haul you into their lie, and then they get you to lie for them. So, but if you suddenly start lying against them and against the system, and you start working against it, you feel great. You start getting out of your learned helplessness, and it becomes infectious. Now that infection can grow. So don't make the mistake that, oh, it has to be you see, it's a big mistake to say it has to be a big voluntary revolution. Right? That's never going to happen. The middle class is absolutely entrenched. They are going to walk over the cliff before they lose their status as house slaves, right? So the billionaires will reform themselves long before the house slaves will. The house slaves have made the devil's bargain and said, we will sell our souls for a better place in the plantation. Now, anybody that's that much of a weasel, and everybody in the middle class is that weasel, those people are irredeemable. Those people are so low, they have no soul, and they have no conscience. They have no virtue. So you'll never get them back. The plantation owners will reform themselves before the house slaves do. So it's useless to say, well, we can't have a revolution without the house slaves, and we must convince the house slaves the house slaves will do anything in protest except go against the master and the plantation system. So they are the enemy, and then people say, well, you can't wage war on the public. Yeah, of course you can. In fact, you must, because you need a divide for people to come over. See, people, as the system goes down, people will get disgusted with the system. And then the next step is to get disgusted with the middle class, the bourgeois that supports it, all the mindless little perfunctings that go and do their job and congratulate themselves by delivering the milk in the system, by taking their jabs, by doing all this compliance. They congratulate them. I was an obedient soldier, they tell themselves. And so make them feel like a shit for being an obedient soldier.
I think a lot of the people actually believe they don't support the system. I think a lot of people are saying, "Oh, we want to smash the patriarchy. We want to, get tokenism to be the law of the land," and they're fighting in irrelevant battles essentially. And I think that I get that it's not a numbers game. But it. Of the people on the left and some on the right, it's I think there are ways to co-opt the existing impulse to fight if some people realize that the things that they're fighting for are actually counterproductive. Like if it was take me for example. Like I had I was just a MSNBC type of person, for a while, and I was able to break out of that. And I think that there are other people like me somewhere that are wanting to push back against the system, but all the avenues that they're given are irrelevant. They need to zoom out and see that it doesn't matter to the system what race or sexual orientation the workers in the system are. It just wants to grow that. In fact, the more people that are included as cogs in the system are that benefits the system more. So when you see all this corporate sponsored leftism in Silicon Valley and things like this, like it's clear that the people that are actively doing this, like it just reeks of corporatism. And I hope that there are some people who would be able to be reached through that realization.
There are. The problem is that instinct is that they think, well, now I'm isolated. So they feel like I'm the only person in the history of the world that has seen through the scam and seen the man behind the curtain and seen, that the emperor has no clothes. And so they feel isolated and alone. The first thing that has to happen is they have to connect with a group and a bunch of like-minded people to tell them, no, you're not actually crazy. You're actually one of the people that has just turned sane. So they often said people go mad in crowds, but they become sane slowly and one by one. So the thing is to have someplace, a harbor for people to get to one by one. The next thing that happens is they get sunk into depression. So the thing is not to avoid that. They need to get sunk deeper and deeper into depression, as deep as you can possibly go to the bedrock. And then out of that comes a catharsis. So you want to go so far into depression that there's nowhere else to go. And then that's the only way you can get onto some kind of catharsis and grief. You see, what a lot of what people that have seen, a lot of people have seen that the emperor has no clothes, but they're avoiding grief. A lot of people have seen that, like, there's no way out of this predicament, but they're protecting themselves from the hurt and the grief of actually admitting that. So it is a big step to get over to do that. But if once you do that, then people think, well, it's hopeless. There's no, you'd need mass effort, and that effort isn't going to come in time. And you say, yeah, but that's not the point. The point is pretty much as Pholtius says all the time, it's doing right action and achieving the rightness is all. So the idea is to get over this idea of control, that you can actually save the system. And then say, what can you do? Well, in the circumstances, there's, as an individual, there's a lot, but the main thing is to work on yourself, and then the thing is to do things that then increase, get you out of your depression. And the secret remedy is kryptonite, is basically doing stuff against the system. So actively sabotaging in the smallest way possible, just as much as you need, but it'll give you a big kick to do that. And then that's the path to rebellion. Is so all of this stuff is said by Fawlty. So it's like he's absolutely on the right track. He's not trying to convince people to reform. He's not really, although he has to say that, oh yeah, no, we're going to overthrow the government and then have citizens' assemblies and stuff. It's like he's really doing what I'm saying, and that's basically blooding them, getting people first blood so that they get radicalized, and then they can do other stuff. So it's a stepping stone towards radicalizing. And what the aim is to radicalize people. But the only quibble I have with what he's doing is he hasn't got the end game in sight. So he's not taking people towards destroying the system. He's still got the narrative. Maybe he feels that he has to have this narrative at this stage of the game, but he's not taking people towards ending the system. He's still got narrative, and the reform narrative is pure poison. In fact, it actually supports the system and it stops people getting radicalized and gives them false hope. So you want people to lose hope, go through sorrow, catharsis, and then start rebelling. But they're real warriors when they start rebelling without any anticipation of victory. So you have to get out of the mode of thinking we can actually achieve victory and say, no, we are in a hopeless lost cause, and you do it anyway. And then the end result, if you're looking for a result, is the rightness is all.
Yes, I was looking at the sub on the Black Friday strike, and I've been going through the people who are writing a bit in that sub. Yesterday, I was looking at a few comments, and you got a vast array of mindsets there. There's quite a few who have an outcome in view, but I get the general feeling that a lot of people, they're just doing what you're saying. they're lashing out, and they want to sabotage one of those holy days of the week for the consumer. And they seem to be having great fun in the process. Some guys are very creative, making leaflets and posters and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of good energy channel there. So I keep looking at that sub, and I posted what you had written on the nickel and dime strike, and I think you put something on the debt strike with a link to another sub and all that. So have anybody something to say about that Black Friday action? What do you think of it? Okay. Nothing.
Well, no, I think it's great. It's see that it's how the sentiment for rebellion starts. It's so you see, I think most people they don't want to end the system. They just want to reform it. And so one of the things that's difficult for people to accept, and one of the reasons why you need to personally change your mindset, is because people are still, faced with annihilation. They're in a bargaining stage, and they're trying to bargain their way out. So a lot of the sacrifices that people are making, it's a false sacrifice, because it's a sacrifice where they intend repayment. So in other words, it's not a sincere sacrifice, because it's not entirely altruistic, and it has a gain in mind, which is not real sacrifice. So real sacrifice is making a sacrifice without any intention of gain. But people are thinking in terms of gaining from these things, and so they're thinking in terms of striking a blow at the system, but not with the aim of reforming it. And so what's very difficult, and what a difficult mindset to get into, is no, you can't bargain into a new world. In other words, all these utopians, all these dangerous utopians like communists and stuff, they want to know, tell me the world after. So I rebel against the system, and they say things like, well, we have to have a vision of what the system is like afterwards. In other words, to make it so attractive that everybody will run to this new system. And he's saying, no, we have to bring down this evil, destructive Moloch. All we know is that this system is horrendous. And so, and what do we have after that? Nothing. We muddle through. Everybody talks about human ingenuity all along, up and down the line, and say we rely on human ingenuity afterwards. We don't plan now what it looks like afterwards. We just bring down what the system is now, because it's killing us. And then what happens after that? Who the hell knows? It's just like but see, again, we must talk about this tonight, about food, because this is what happens in the concentration camps. And all these kind of camps is they keep these guys, in the plantation with a bowl of rice a day. So if you go in a plantation or in a death camp like Auschwitz, I'm pretty sure if you said to people like, hey, we need to rebel against this or we're all going to die, they're going to say, well, so they're all going to say a version of, yeah, it's all right for you to say, but where do I get my bowl of rice today? Is if I rebel against the system, how do I eat tonight? Who's going to feed me? And so it's all subtly kept together with this expectation that unless you can tell me what a better Auschwitz is, I'm not going to rebel against this one. You say, no, it's a matter of time. You're going to be wound up in a death chamber. And then say, like, I don't care. They're going to give me a bowl of rice in the evening. And that's all I care about. So they won't defect from this system because they want the bowl of rice. You have to get to the point of view and say, I don't care. I don't care if I get a bowl of rice today or not. I'm rebelling now. And that's the psychological tipping point that people need to get to. And only a few will get to it. But the thing is, you only need a few. The whole concentration camp is held together compliance of the many. But you only need an incredible small amount of defection to bring the whole system down, because it's incredibly fragile, and people don't realize how fragile it is until they start poking around. As soon as you start poking around, you'll be awestruck at what a paper tiger the whole system is. But that's why I don't agree with Faulty in this above ground non-violent thing, because it's stopping people finding out the fragility of this thing. While you do above ground non-violent action, you're still buying into the lie that this is a huge system that's invulnerable and could never be, you never go up against it and stuff. It's like, well, you're only going to find out its weaknesses if you go, to full spectrum and you go underground. You don't get caught. So I just can't say enough about this stupid idea of doing these dramatic actions that then get you years in jail. It's like, it's just, this is a fundamental point of departure that I'm saying, you've got to do a cost-benefit analysis. Every action, you've got to do a cost-benefit analysis, and you've got to find things that are extremely cheap to you, but very costly to the system. But now that gets Faulty's back up. He really gets excited if you say that, because he's saying, no, it's not about cost benefit. And the reason why he's saying it's not about cost benefit is he's trying to get people, he's trying to ignite a passionate wave of righteousness in people. So he wants a popular wave of righteousness. And I say, well, you might be able to achieve that, not quite yet, not in 6 months, I don't think. But at some stage, people are going to get inflamed, and we are going to storm the gates of St. Petersburg. But you're saying, like, to what end? By that time, you'll be bringing down the system, but like, for what? There won't be anything left in the Derek Jensen terms. There's not enough wilderness left to go back to. So it's like, I don't want to, do Mad Max in New York or something like that. It's like, that isn't the way it comes down. It's, again, go and look at South Africa, and you'll see how it turns out. It turns out to lots of people hanging on in a very shitty way, just all innovating in a very shitty way. But at some point, we're at a tipping point where there's nothing left. We know we're heading for extinction, and it's almost a cruel irony that the system then collapses when it's too late. So I think, it's you don't want to get a wave of indignation about of self-righteousness, because also there's something a little odious about it in my view. It's this it's hard to describe, but you're perpetuating this idea. It's kind of like the white man's burden. So you're perpetuating this idea, saying, billions of people are going to die in Africa, and they're going to be, there's going to be 1 billion people on the move, migrating and stuff, and that's a crime. That's outrageous, and you don't care because they're brown people. And I was like, whoa, this is a dangerous thing. It's like the assumptions of house slaves are dripping in this. In my view, people in New York and London are going to get hit hard. People in Africa have far more chance of surviving, in pockets maybe not in Nigeria or something. But if you ask me to bet on horses, I'd say India, a write-off. China, more than a write-off. Russia, yeah. Europe, yeah. America, blah. It's basically all these guys in cities. I would bet they're going to go down horribly. And anybody it's basically how far away you are from a city is how well you survive. So it's like, sure, there'll be billions of people moving and stuff. They are already. I've got them freaking in rafts coming up the coast here. So it's saying, like, that doesn't mean they're all dead. Those guys are survivors. The guys in caravans moving around, they're surviving. they making ends meet and managing to survive on the road. It's like while you sit on your plum duff on the internet. It's like, I'll tell you who's going to survive, not you on the internet. You need healthcare. You need, financial systems. You need the shops open. You need all this infrastructure. You need the grid up. It's like you are an ex-person. You are just on the wrong side of extinction. But those guys who are basically roughing it and sleeping on the road, a migrant in a caravan, I'd give him twice the chance of some fat cat in New York. You see, you're forgetting all these systems as they stand. Everybody thinks they stand forever, but Elon Musk and all of those guys, he's and all of these guys is their fortunes go in a day because they all bound into the stock market in this existing system. You just basically need a few reversals, which will come, and you'll be wiped out. You'll be worth nothing in a day. And it'll be all these, lamenting transhumanists saying, "Oh, well, our cult leader Elon Musk, he was going to take us to Mars, and now he's broke." So they're like, "Yeah, arseholes, what did you think the stock market was going to carry on all the way to Mars?" It's like, get real. So I don't like this idea of this is all about brown people and morals of the white man's burden and stuff. It's like, no, you're in trouble. It's the plantation is burning down and you are a house slave. You are the one that's in trouble. The field slaves, they know what it's like living in the field, man.
But I also think, and I'm not going to make friends saying that, but I think that in this movement that we're talking about, there's a reeking background of kind of Christian stinky reward at the end. I will be, I'm going to get something out of this because I'm doing a good deed, and that thing is pervading through the movement, and it really reeks. It's just, giving a good conscience, and this kind of idea, I'll gain my little place in heaven kind of thing. And that I can get it everywhere.
Yeah, that's so important. So I'll tell you this, and this is a certainty, is during collapse, it's just cults. It's just cults everywhere. You see it already. Just Elon Musk is a cult. It's like what we're doing is a cult. XR is a cult. They're all cults and cult leaders. So what happens in these times is that everybody just picks their cult. So it's, faced with annihilation is everybody runs for a cult. So, you can have a drinking club is a cult. Is people that take drugs is a cult. It's a drug culture. So it's what's going to happen as things get bad is everybody has their cult. And so what they're doing with things like, to answer a bit more for Petra's question, is what's happening with, say, anti-vaxxers and stuff like that, vax refuseniks, is they're just making another cult. I mean, I feel myself, just after being checked out of a restaurant, I feel like, okay, I feel militantly against, now I'm feeling bloody minded enough just to not get a vax, just to prove a point. And but that's the mind. You see, what will happen is you'll meet up with other people that are like-minded. And this is the start of an egregore, of a cult. So it's kind of like being on the Titanic, and you find which cabin you want to be in, with which people you get to the conclusion, like, okay, this ship is going down. Nothing we can do about it. So which people do I want to hang out with in the end times? And you go and have a look at the cabins. These ones are Christian evangelists, and they say, well, we're all going to do the right thing, so, Jesus is going to save us. And I'm like, oh, God, spare me. And then you go and find Jem Bendel, and he says, we're all going to sing Kumbaya and then take phenobarbital. And I'm like, oh, God, not that. Some people go, well, we're going to party till we drop. And I say, well, yeah, okay, that's more like it. But maybe that the party is going to run out of alcohol before the situation ends. So that's probably not the thing. And you eventually work out which crowd you want to hang out with. But I can tell you, I'll save you a lot of time. You're saying, like, you just find the wise. You want to be in the company of the wise. The wise are the best cabin to be in, right? So go pick the people that are wise, and the very, very few. Is rather spend your time looking for a cabin of wise people rather than going down the houses to try and decide what flavor of cabin you want to be in. But you're going to have to be in a cult, some cult, and you want a cult of the wise. Why? Because it's civilized, refined, and, well, maybe not civilized and refined. I don't want to be Epicurean about it, but what I'm saying is you can reach the ripeness of all. You can have a meaningful sinking on the Titanic. What the big problem with most of these other cabins are, they're meaningless. See, Jem Bendel and singing Kumbaya, it's a kind of a lie. It's saying, well, we all, at the edge of extinction, only love remains. And say, really? Do you really think these people love each other? It's like, I don't. I think you're lying. You're saying, I wish people loved each other. So we're going to sing Kumbaya and drink phenobarbital because we know it's a lie and we can't take the truth. But you see, you can get to a much better place by saying well, these people are all liars, but what's the truth? Maybe the truth is everybody's a liar, and then where do you go from there? But you got to go on a path to wisdom, and the sooner you get on that path, the more time you can save. So if you can actually get to a point where you actually liberate yourself, then you can actually help other people, and you can do all of the stuff. You can achieve all of the other cults' aims without that they're not going to get to, because they're kind of trying to buy in cheap. They're kind of a fraud of what they're trying to achieve. But if you first achieve wisdom, you can achieve what they're trying to do. You can have your Christian soul and stuff, but Christians are shits. So they can't save their souls because the mere fact that they're the frozen chosen, you think they're superior to everybody else, and they have a key in Jesus, means that they're ineligible for the very thing that they're advocating that they've got. They are not Christians. Anybody that believes in Jesus is not a Christian in terms of what Jesus was trying to get to. So the very first thing, if you want to be a good Christian, the very first thing is to do is stamp on Christianity, spit on the cross, get militant against Jesus. It's the only way you can get to some kind of Christian ideal. Lots of people figured that out. The Albigensians figured that out. The Templar Knights figured that out. Why do you think the vicious Catholic Church went and persecuted them all? Because they were telling the truth. You've got to get rid of Christianity to be a good, better Christian.
This is a bit of a minor point, but since you brought up the anti-vaxxers, and earlier I was thinking of it when you had the saying that the climate denial is going away, like nobody's holding that. That's a big part of the anti-vaxxer kind of cult that I see. The right libertarian anti-vax cult is hugely into climate denial, as far as I've seen, at least at my age group.
Yeah, you see, what they're trying to do is, you see, they're trying to paint all vax refuseniks as that right-wing libertarian, capital storming, bunch of ignorant rubes, and it's saying, nah, that's a bit too broad a brush. There's a lot of you see, the vax refuseniks that I know, certainly here in Greece, they got to like 60%. That last 40%, that's a hard. Well, you're going to have to get really militant to get that 40% vaccinated. And the reason is that people they don't really they don't really see the actual virus as a threat, because not many people have got it around here, and so, but they do see the government as a threat. And so it's the same on the right-wing side, is that not everybody is a Trump supporter. But you see, it's very cheap and convenient for them to just say, like, on the mainstream TV and like Stephen Colbert and late night kind of comedy, is you ridicule the right wing, saying anybody that would refuse a vaccine is just a Trump supporter. And you think, well, that's a big mistake right there, because that it's not actually true. And they're driving a lot of people together that they would prefer to divide. But you see, if anti-Trump libertarians, which I put myself in that category, actually find common cause with the far right nutcase anti-5G conspiracy theorists, storming the Capitol, they could have a much bigger problem in terms of holding the plantation together. So I think they're scoring an own goal there. So personally, I love this anti-vax subject in that, not because of the vax. I mean, I couldn't really give a shit about the vax or the virus. What's impressing me is that it's driving these wedges. It's just another wedge issue, and these guys are making the hugest mistake of their life. This kind of woke industry and this kind of bourgeois Puritan industry is like, wow, woke Puritanism and wow, that is driving. We've just seen in an election in America how there's backlash against that. So woke alone will drive people against the system. So I mean, I see a lot of nice fracture points coming in. I think we're winning.
Yeah, there's some of that in the military as well. Some of the military is starting to fracture as well, and they're starting to, what ended the Vietnam campaign was fragging their superior officers and stuff like this. I think we're going to start to see some of the military discipline break down a little bit as people realize they're not fighting for what they were told they're fighting for.
I think that is a very good point. You see, I know a lot of people. My kids had in the soccer team, they had a soccer mom there who was in Iraq, in the Gulf War. The Iraq War, and she was really, really fucked up by chemical weapons. Now the US refuses to acknowledge loads of troops, but she was in a camp where all the NBC warnings went off, and they couldn't evacuate them. Thousands of troops. They couldn't evacuate them. They didn't have any NBC equipment or any suits or anything, so they just told them to stay in place. They wouldn't let them evacuate, and so they told the alarms just went crazy, on and on and on, and they were starting to feel all the health effects of it's basically all these munitions dumps and stuff that were upwind that they, sappers, I think, blew up. But they got all these agents that they never knew what they were, and they forbid them from actually moving. And eventually they just told them to switch the alarms off. Now, they all got severely fucked up, and they all knew that it was from that. She said luckily her daughter turned out fairly normal, but not that normal. Her kid was not normal, that's for sure. But anyway, her whole life has been ruined by these medical things. Now, there's a whole group that she's part of that is very, very anti-government. Basically, essentially anarchist because of the way they treated them and won't let them tell the truth about what happened with NBC weapons in Iraq. And then there are dozens of people with health effects from the military. There's another group who before going into Iraq, they made people have vaccines known to every chemical agent they knew about. So some of these people had vaccines for like literally, I think, 300 things that they were vaccinated against. Now, Jenna and epidemiologists and stuff, nobody ever said, you can vaccinate people against, 300 different, agents in with 10 injections of them. But these people were turned into pin cushions before they went in because they just said, well, this might be a possible agent used against you. And so they believed that they got completely fucked up by those 300 antigens that they received vaccines for. And they're not allowed to talk about it. They all, it's all classified stuff, and they can't prosecute the military. And so there's, if you're wondering where QAnon and that comes from, if you're a late night TV host, then it's all wacky Trump supporters. No, it's people that are fucking been through Iraq and what they've brought home from Iraq. It's like what Euthanasia says. It's like the war comes home. You go and prosecute an unjust war somewhere. It doesn't stay overseas. It's when all the soldiers come home, they bring all the trauma from that back. So what you're seeing in the insurrection is the trauma brought back from Iraq. Now, no late night host will say that. It's all kind of, it's all because of 5G conspiracy theories. No, it fucking isn't. But they can't say what it really is, because otherwise other people will start to question the system. So, but the military, as I say, is just one more example of how fragile the system is. The military itself is hanging on a tenterhook. Those guys on January the 6th, they came from the military and they've got training. You saw them use it at the fucking thing. That was frightening. That was frightening. You see what we saw on January the 6th. The average American and the middle class and the house slaves, they didn't know what they were looking at. They didn't see what they saw with their very eyes. They didn't know enough to know what they were looking at. What happened there was frightening, and it hasn't gone away. So that's coming, and so there's QAnon as well. There's a cult. So pick your cult, man. You got to pick your cult, lads, because it's cults. It's a prison yard. It's gangs. Think of it as a prison yard. Prison yard is getting very Auschwitz-y. And you got to pick which gang you're going to be in. And I suggest you don't pick one of the mainstream gangs, because those guys are all going to go down. My view is you want a little gang of survivors in the corner that preferably is pretty secret about which gang they're in.
I wanted to make a comment on what you're saying there, Hugh. The other day, I was listening to an ex-Special Forces guy. Why, I don't know. It came up on YouTube. But he's so anti-Democrats and so anti the vaccine mandates that he was openly saying that other military folks were resigning, and they were rejecting the military and rejecting the government. So, yeah, it's absolutely about trauma, but it's also about the opposition now is so extreme that they're like different camps altogether, different nations, and so they're saying we would never fight for an America that is under democratic rule. He was completely opposed to the agitation against Russia. Yeah, there were just a whole series of things. He said, this is not my country anymore. Anybody who fights for these Democrats is not fighting for America. So there's fractures there too. And then you see the police resigning over the mandates here, a minority, but it's bigger than the mainstream media wants to give it credit for. Yesterday there was a protest here, and it's getting media coverage. They're saying it's 1,000 people. I know multiple people who were there, and they said it was between 80 and 100,000, like a huge protest in Melbourne around the vaccine mandates and the lockdown. And this is the world over, these huge protests, and the mainstream media is reporting them as 1,000 people here, 1,000 people there. One of the protests here, they wouldn't allow drone footage because that would show how many people there were. And then they'll only show, the end of it when it's dispersing, or they'll show some particularly violent male, not all the families that are there. There's a priest interviewed, not in the mainstream. But do you see what I mean? So I agree with you that the fractures are much deeper than are being revealed. And it's a sort of heterodox demographic too, who's opposing. It's not just one set of people. It's a whole diverse range of people, and new alliances are forming too. So you've got these kind of Republican types or these nationalist types linking with lefties who no longer have a home because they're against the woke stuff, like me, for example. So I think there's new alliances that are emerging on the other side of the fragmentation.
I think that's true. And I think that the military leaders are aware of these fractures. And they are also trying to remove human beings from the military as much as possible so that they can maintain their control with autonomous weapons. So that means you take the human element out of the loop.
Yeah, I think so. So Petra, is they deciding today whether they're going to lock down unvaccinated people, right, in Australia? Is that right?
Yeah, so Victoria has the most punitive legislation. So there's a protest about some legislation that our Premier Dan Andrews is trying to pass now, which gives him even greater authority than he's already been exercising, so that he can just essentially lock down the state without the level of consultation that was required before. I mean, it's not much, right? But it's checking and ticking boxes. So he's passing legislation, and it's been accepted by a range of apparently radical fringe parties. They're obviously not, like the Greens, Animal Justice. A number of independents are supporting this legislation, which will give him so much power to announce lockdowns. We already had the longest lockdown in the world, and to impose vaccine mandates. And there's some other draconian stuff in the legislation too, like deciding whether people need medical interventions and so on, without a whole lot of consultation or notice. So it's pretty draconian. And yeah, that's getting passed. It's been passed in one of the Houses of Parliament, and it's going through next week. The vaccine mandates are now already in, and so anyone who's not double vaxxed can't shop anywhere but essentials, and can't go to anywhere really other than the doctor. So you can't go to a hairdresser, you can't go to a cafe. Yeah, so you basically cannot participate in society now unless you're double vaccinated.
In Austria, they're going
Only
to.
essential.
In Austria, they're going to decrete this week a lockdown for people who are not vaccinated only. So that means that they're going to have to only the non-vaccinated will stay at home. They'll only be allowed to go out for shopping and doctor and stuff like that. So it's going to be actually.
Yes,
Yeah, I thought that's what.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that's what was happening in Australia today. Yeah,
it is. Yeah. Yeah, that is what's happening. So the protest was about that, and this legislation, which is essentially extending the power to the Premier to do that without the kinds of checks and balances that don't work anyway, but he's removing those. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pleased. This is all good for us. This is the way you destroy the system.
Yeah, well, it is.
No, it's all good news. Right? It's all good news. Yeah, this is what you call overreach. It's you see, there are a number of things that what it signals. It's really government powerlessness. So this is what I said before: is when you see these draconian things come down, when people think, well, this is totalitarian government. No, it's a weak government. All of these things are acts of weakness. No politician would want to do these kind of things. They're doing them because they're cornered. They know that the vax doesn't work, and they know that we're in deep trouble. So that they're doing all of these overreaches that cost them dearly. So the way to see them is a great result for us and against the system. All of these things are undermining the system. They all think these things are temporary, but people will remember these things for generations. That they actually did this and went this far. And what they're doing is unjust. They're trying to prop up their power, and they're trying to prop up the economy and the system. And so they're exposing themselves. You see, this is a tremendously good result, because before this, the house slaves and liberals, the bourgeois, can lie to themselves. They can always lie and say the plantation system isn't what it is. They can say the plantation system is voluntary. They can make up all sorts of deceptions, self-deceptions. But when stuff like this comes out, it's like, okay, guys, there, you see? Now you see what's underlying the system. You can't deny it anymore, so stop your bullshit. So this is a big bullshit stopper. That's what it is. It's they're revealing themselves that the mask is coming off. The masks are not going on. The masks are coming off, and people are seeing the system for what it is. It's great. It's great.
I
Well,
w-
yeah.
Well, it's
I want
certainly
to be-
mobilizing people. But
They're
I think,
exposing themselves in their game. It's a wonderful time.
I think one of the shadow sides of this, though, is that, I mean, definitely it's meaning that people are connecting, but there's, yeah, hang on. Sorry, I lost my train of thought then because a kid just called out. Hang on, sorry.
So I wanted to say I want to be hopeful about these negative effects, it's changing people's minds about the system. But, with the Soviet Union, people were aware of how bad it was for a long time. And it didn't get overthrown for decades and decades.
Yes,
Yeah, that's
the
what I
problem.
wanted to say when I got interrupted.
These things are slow.
Hugh. Well, most of the people agree here. So the research shows, and again, that could be corrupted and captured, but the vast majority of people, I think it's an 80-20 split, if you can trust the figures, but agree with it. So there is a minority, and it's a vocal minority opposing the lockdowns and the mandates and so on. But a lot of people are agreeing with this because of the fear. And so, people move toward strong men and the desire for safety and control and risk culture in the context of the fear that's been whipped up around COVID.
Yeah, you see, but what they've done is they're selling a lie. So it's unfortunate that it takes a long time for these things to work out, like Ron says. But you see, what they're selling is a lie, a knowing lie. They've convinced everybody that the vax is protecting people, and it's God, I don't know how we're going to put this up on YouTube. It's going to be probably going to get another strike for this. But you see, what they've convinced everybody that that it's protecting them, and it isn't. It's not stopping. You see, they think that it's stopping them getting disease. What they've done is they've convinced people that we're in the herd immunity stage. You see, they're always pulling this authoritarian trick. So before there was a vaccine, then they said this about testing, and everybody said, like, why isn't the government doing more testing? Like, testing was going to protect people. It was like we were already past the point of containment. So testing is only useful when you're actually at the point. So we passed the point of containment early. It was by February 2020 that we passed the point of containment. So it's like testing wasn't doing anything for anybody, but they want a rabbit's foot. They want protection. So then they get all upset. Why isn't there enough protection? Then they get the vaccine and they're saying, like, well, we're taking the jab and the risk and everything to protect you unvaccinated people. It's like, you're not protecting me. You're just walking around spreading the disease. It's not stopping you getting it. It's just making you asymptomatic and spreading it around faster. At least if you didn't have a vaccine, at least you'd be bedridden and you couldn't spread it around. But they've sold them this idea that there's protection in the rabbit's foot, and then you guys are not buying into the rabbit's foot, so you're heretics. But you see, where they come up and comes from the fact that when the rabbit's foot is seen to be a rabbit's foot. See, when they have to say, well, you have to get boosters every 3 months and stuff, and then it becomes very clear that guys start to regret that they went with the system. See, and that's the next. Totalitarians are like psychopaths. They're always going for the short-term fix. They're always living in the moment, going, just living minute by minute, day by day. And you see, this is what they're doing. So they grab for the vaccines, not thinking, like, what happens if these vaccines turn out to have negative consequences long term? What happens if they don't turn out to work and we put everybody's faith in them? Then people will lose faith en masse. So all of these things. So for the price of like 20% of just holding out, there's no downside other than basically getting into hospital and dying, which I would take. But the negative consequences of the backlash is they're risking, they're gamblers, they're rolling the dice way too aggressively. And so, yeah, the way I look at it, I'm sitting back and laughing. If I escape the virus and the vax, I would consider myself cock of the hoof, because they're going to pay for this. If I get the virus and get long-term damage or die, it's like, fuck it. Well, you win some, you lose some. But like, I put a lot of effort into not getting the vax, just to, because it's more important to me to have resistance against the bigger system and the industrial system than it is to have a virus caused by that industrial system. So I'd rather resist the death camp than I would the cholera you got from the death camp system. So in other words, taking the jab is taking one for the system. So I say, like, go ahead. I sincerely hope you live to regret it, because then you'll come over to my side and be against the system.
Yeah, I do wonder about the level of anger that's going to come when it's clear that it's futile. I mean, it's a study only came out last week showing that people who are unvaccinated, people who are vaccinated pass it on in their household just as much as the unvaccinated. So it's becoming clear that the unvaccinated can't be cast as the unwashed. But that would be to assume that people were rational about it, and they're not. So even though this is just starting to trickle into the mainstream, well, here at any rate, the majority of people are not, they're not being swayed by that. They still see the unvaccinated as the people they need to avoid and the people that they need to lock up or prevent from coming into their shops. You know, I don't care. I don't like those shops anyway. But I care for my kids. It's tough for the kids.
Yeah, they're gambling with the kids, which is a real offense against the mammalian brain. It's a real no-no. And so once they throw the kids into the mix, you know things are really bad. Because, I mean, they know it's an experimental thing.
How can they put the kids on the front line? Sorry. I said it's against nature.
Yeah,
how can they put the kids on the front line? It's unacceptable to me.
Yeah, and they said, like, oh, well, kids were not immune. They said they thought at the beginning that kids had more immunity. It was only because they, were closed the schools. But now that they've opened the schools, they realize that kids are just as immune as anybody else. And say, like, why didn't anybody say, why do we have the schools open then? Oh, no, we have to socialize them. They're missing key points of socialization. And we might have a generation that winds up being unsocialized. And I'm saying, yeah. So you basically admitted that you're going to use experimental therapies, gene therapies on kids, and you're going to keep the school open because you want to socialize them for this. I have a better idea. Fuck you, let the kids go free. Close the fucking schools. They should have been closed long ago.
And the risks for the kids in terms of percentage of getting a serious illness or even long COVID or dying are so tiny, but nobody's looking at those figures. It's and they highlight any death or any amount of kids sick, like with a total dishonesty, even in the medical publications. And if you look back, if you really dig down, it's absolutely scandalous. There's, I know, and you're right with they're triggering the mammalian brain, and that's very dangerous because they're trying to go down now. In the States, it's going to come out for the 5 to 12. In Europe, they're discussing it. In some countries, they want to start it. They've already massively jabbed teenagers, and I'm not going into that anti-vax whatever. It's not that. The problem is that they are triggering something very deep. And there's two women here, and I know that we, and we're, we know now, we're a bit more in the know, but when things are going to come out afterwards, the anger is going to be extreme, I think. I think it's going to be very interesting to observe this.
Let's not forget that the school system is not just to socialize the youth. It's also to make sure that the parents stay in the field, right? That they don't spend time having connections with their family. It has to be, you have to keep workers productive and take the children away to make sure that they don't get distracted, or they don't have a responsibility to their family.
Well, it's
Yeah, you undermine
institutionalized childcare, isn't it?
996 if people have. You undermine 996 if you have family bonds.
Exactly.
What's 996? Please excuse my ignorance.
Jojo Liu. It's
I'm thinking Maxwell Smart, 96.
no 996 is in China. It's the what we call work-life balance over here. So it's 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week that you're supposed to be in the office. Yeah, it's very common, and there's a lot of debates on it in China right now. But yeah, it's in the tech industry and in general, it's just people working a lot harder. It's a big reason why Silicon Valley companies struggle to enter the Chinese market, is because this is a gladiatorial combat arena here, where people will, absolutely outwork everybody else. They will outspend, outcapitalize, they'll buy every stage of the supply chain just to make sure that they can outcompete their competitors. Because one day in the market, you get some positive press, you have 100 new competitors the next day. So it's not because there's government support of certain businesses, even though that is the case ultimately. It's that Silicon Valley entrepreneurs are weak compared to the Chinese.
I've been here before. This is Japan in the 1980s. I know where this ends up.
Where does it end up? Higher suicide rates, or where does it end up? Higher suicide rates?
Those kind of competitive environments. They basically, everybody's trying to seek monopoly, and they're subject to delusions. So like everybody will get in on AI or something, and it'll achieve nothing. You see, they've already done it once. They did it in manufacturing, and then in the garment districts and stuff, they had like buttons, filling up the streets and the gutters and stuff, because all these button factories are merged to service the garment industry. They massively overproduced, and eventually buttons were everywhere. And the same happens with software. Eventually, you have so many apps that are just piece of shit that it's like you see what these are. You have competition like this in capitalism to decide monopolists. So it's a very short-lived phase. But you see, what particularly I think China is vulnerable is they're vulnerable to superstition. So they'll get into AI thinking, this is going to be the winning thing, and it will achieve nothing. It will be vacuous, empty promise. And then they'll all be wiped out. It won't be like the internet where you have a few, monopolistic survivors. There'll be no survivors because they're subject to superstitious belief in technology rather than actual.
It won't achieve nothing. It will achieve market incentives of making everything and everything more legible. So it will digitize information about everyone and everything. So regardless of whether the AI works or not, it will support the system in the long run. It'll make the Stasi look like a preschool, like the amount of data that are collected.
Yeah. I think they'll normalize all of the shitty parts of AI, so everything will become more bureaucratic and shitty. So it's basically they're rushing headlong into being the GDR rather than rushing headlong into some tech utopia.
I think the other thing is that they'll export that. So right now there are some free countries left whose governments are too poor to implement mass surveillance, and they're just going to make that cheaper. It's going to, the economies of scale, they're just going to sell that out to all the little smaller countries now, and there won't be a place on Earth left, essentially.
But You see that, but that's when the opportunity for mass protest starts then, because that's when you get the kind of lying down protest. So I think that debt strikes and rent strikes and all of that kind of thing, they start then. You start getting the grassroots resistance at that stage. So all good. Yeah. I guess people are dropping off. I guess it's the end. The end. we should round it off.
Yeah, I'm getting hungry, so I'm soon going to have to leave too.
Okay, so well, let's just pause quickly and then just round it off. Om Paramatma Namah. Thank you, everybody. I didn't look much at the comments in the chat, but anyway.
Yeah. I can put them in the link later on. I've kept some of them, not all of them, but I've kept some. Okay. I'm going to stop recording. Bye-bye.